Waitress returned a lost wallet to a millionaire. Next day, she found her name in his will. But when his son accused her of manipulation, the entire city stood speechless. But before we begin, subscribe now, or this might be our last meeting. Follow, comment, and share to stay connected. Don't miss out. Let's dive in. The rain had been falling for hours, turning the streets of Boston into rivers of gray. Inside the Riverside Diner, Lena Carter wiped down the last table with movements that had become automatic after 6 years of practice. The Formica counter gleamed under the flickering fluorescent lights, and through the frost-covered windows, she could see abandoned cars dotting the highway like scattered toys. It was nearly midnight. Her feet ached in shoes that should have been replaced months ago, and her back protested every bend and stretch. But Lena had learned long ago that complaining changed nothing. "Last call, sweetie," Martha called from the kitchen, her voice rough from decades of cigarettes. "Just finishing up," Lena replied, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. The bell above the door chimed as the last customer of the night stood to leave. He was an older gentleman, probably in his 70s, with silver hair perfectly styled and a suit that looked expensive. He'd ordered nothing but black coffee and had spent the past hour reading the Wall Street Journal. Lena had served enough wealthy customers to recognize the type: old money, worn like a second skin. But this man had been different. He'd said please and thank you, had looked her in the eyes when she refilled his cup. She watched him button his coat against the rain, adjusting his scarf with practiced efficiency. The door closed behind him, and Lena returned to her cleaning routine. She was spraying down the counter when something caught her eye: a black leather wallet, resting exactly where the gentleman had been sitting. Her heart skipped. The wallet was clearly expensive, the leather soft and well-maintained. She picked it up carefully, feeling its weight. Inside, she found credit cards with names she recognized from business magazines, a driver's license, and a stack of bills that made her breath catch. There must have been at least $3,000 in cash. Lena's hands trembled slightly. $3,000. That was rent for 6 months. That was the surgery her mother needed but couldn't afford. That was freedom from the crushing weight of bills that never seemed to stop coming. No one would know. The diner was empty except for Martha. The security cameras had been broken for 2 years. The thought lasted exactly 3 seconds before shame washed over her like cold water. "Damn it," she muttered, already moving toward the door. The rain hit her face the moment she stepped outside, immediately soaking through her thin uniform. The cold made her gasp, but she pushed forward, scanning the street. There, about half a block away, a yellow taxi was pulling away from the curb. "Sir!" Lena shouted, breaking into a run. "Sir, wait!" Her shoes splashed through puddles, and the wallet was clutched tight against her chest. The taxi's brake lights flared red. She reached the car just as the back window rolled down, revealing the gentleman's surprised face. "Sir, you forgot this," Lena said breathlessly, holding out the wallet. Water dripped from her hair into her eyes, and she was shivering violently, but she managed a smile. The man's expression shifted from confusion to astonishment. He took the wallet slowly, his eyes moving from it to her face and back again. "You ran after me," he said finally, his voice carrying disbelief. "In the rain." "It's yours," Lena replied simply. "Couldn't let you leave without it." The man opened the wallet, checking the contents. When he looked up again, his eyes held something like wonder. He reached for his money clip, pulling out several bills. "Please let me reward you." "No, thank you," Lena interrupted gently but firmly. "A clear conscience is payment enough." The words came automatically, something her mother used to say. The man's hand froze, the money still extended. "A clear conscience," he repeated softly, and something in his expression changed. He pulled a napkin from his pocket and wrote something quickly before tucking it into his coat. "What's your name, young lady?" "Lena Carter." "Lena Carter," he said, as if committing it to memory. He smiled then, a genuine expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Thank you, Miss Carter. You've restored something I thought was lost." Before she could ask what he meant, the taxi pulled away, its red taillights disappearing into the storm. Lena stood on the sidewalk, water pooling in her shoes, watching until the car vanished around the corner. She walked back slowly, her clothes plastered to her skin and her teeth chattering. Martha looked up from the register when she entered. "Girl, what in the world?" "Customer forgot his wallet," Lena explained, wringing water from her hair. "Had to return it." Martha shook her head, but there was pride in her eyes. "You're too good for this world, Lena Carter." Lena changed into spare clothes and finished closing up. As she locked the door and headed for the bus stop, she had no idea that the gentleman in the taxi was Harold Reed, founder and CEO of Reed Holdings, one of the largest real estate empires on the East Coast. She had no idea that he was sitting in the back of that taxi, still holding the napkin with her name written on it, his mind turning over the rare gift he'd just received, genuine honesty in a world that had forgotten its value. She had no idea that her simple act of decency had just changed her life forever. The rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean, and somewhere in the darkness, fate was already writing the next chapter. 3 weeks later, Harold Reed died in his sleep. The news hit the financial world like an earthquake. Trading floors went silent. Stock prices fluctuated wildly. The man who had built an empire from a single apartment building was gone at 76 years old. The funeral was held on a gray Thursday morning at Trinity Church, with over 1,000 people in attendance. Business moguls sat beside politicians, celebrities beside philanthropists. The eulogies painted the picture of a titan of industry, a self-made man who had never forgotten his humble beginnings. Nathan Reed sat in the front pew, his jaw tight and his eyes dry. At 34, he looked exactly like his father had at the same age, the same dark hair, the same sharp features, the same steel-gray eyes that could freeze a boardroom with a single glance. He wore his grief like his suit, perfectly tailored and completely impenetrable. The reading of the will was scheduled for the following Monday at the law offices of Preston and Associates. Nathan arrived exactly on time, his assistant trailing behind him with a tablet and a carefully neutral expression. The conference room was all dark wood and leather chairs with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of Boston Harbor. Nathan took his seat at the head of the table. Around him sat his father's oldest friends, board members, executives, and 3 lawyers who looked uncomfortable. James Preston, senior partner and his father's personal attorney for 40 years, cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. He was a small man with kind eyes and hands that trembled slightly as he opened the thick folder containing Harold Reed's last will and testament. "Before we begin," Preston said carefully, "I want to note that Harold made several amendments to this document in the weeks before his death. The final version was signed exactly 12 days ago." Nathan's eyes narrowed. 12 days ago, his father had seemed perfectly healthy. They'd had dinner together, had argued about a proposed merger. There had been no indication that Harold was planning changes to his will. Preston began reading, his voice steady and professional. The first sections were predictable: donations to charities, provisions for long-time employees, specific bequests of art and personal items. Nathan listened with half his attention, already knowing that the bulk of the estate would come to him. Then Preston's voice changed, taking on a note of careful formality that made Nathan sit up straighter. "To Lena Carter of South Boston," Preston read, and the room went completely silent. "I leave the sum of $5 million, as well as a 10% stake in Reed Holdings, with full voting rights." The words hung in the air like smoke. Nathan felt as if someone had punched him in the chest. Around the table, board members exchanged shocked glances. "I'm sorry," Nathan said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Could you repeat that?" Preston cleared his throat. "Lena Carter. $5 million and 10% of Reed Holdings with voting rights." "Who?" Nathan bit out each word carefully. "Is Lena Carter?" "I don't know," Preston admitted. "Your father didn't share his reasoning. The bequest is accompanied by a sealed letter addressed to Miss Carter, which I'm instructed to deliver personally." Nathan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. His mind was racing. Lena Carter. The name meant nothing to him. He knew every significant person in his father's life, or he thought he did. "This is impossible," he said flatly. "My father wouldn't leave 10% of his company to a stranger." "The will is properly executed and witnessed," Preston replied calmly. "I assure you, it's entirely legal." "Legal or not, it's insane." Nathan paced to the window, his hands clenched behind his back. "What's her connection to my father?" "The address listed is in South Boston," one of the junior lawyers offered hesitantly. "Near the waterfront. South Boston, not Back Bay or Beacon Hill." Nathan turned back to the room, his expression hardening into something cold and calculating. "Find her," he ordered. "I want to know everything: where she works, where she lives, every detail of her relationship with my father." "Nathan," Preston began carefully, "your father was very clear. My father is dead. Nathan interrupted, his voice sharp as broken glass. "And someone has clearly taken advantage of him in his final weeks. I want answers." He left the office without another word, his mind already working through possibilities. A gold digger who had seduced an aging billionaire, a con artist who had manipulated a sick old man, a long-lost relative making a claim on the family fortune. Whatever the truth was, Nathan Reed was going to find it. The press got wind of the story within hours. By that evening, news vans were parked outside Reed Holdings headquarters, and Lena Carter was trending on social media. Speculation ran wild: secret daughter, hidden mistress, unknown protege. The gossip sites had a field day. Nathan watched it all from his corner office, his expression unreadable. Somewhere in this city was a woman who had somehow convinced his father to give her a fortune. 3 days later, the private investigator Nathan had hired delivered a single sheet of paper with an address: Riverside Diner, 247 Harbor Street. Nathan stared at the paper for a long time, then reached for his coat. It was time to meet Lena Carter and discover exactly what game she was playing. Nathan Reed had never set foot in a place like the Riverside Diner. The neighborhood was a far cry from the glass towers and marble lobbies of his world. Here the buildings wore their age like scars, and the people moved with the tired determination of those who worked 2 jobs just to stay afloat. He parked his Mercedes 3 blocks away, no point in announcing his arrival, and walked the rest of the distance with his collar turned up against the cold. The diner sat on a corner lot, its neon sign flickering weakly in the gray afternoon light. Through the smudged windows he could see maybe a dozen customers scattered across worn vinyl booths. Nathan pushed through the door, and a bell chimed above his head. The smell of coffee and frying bacon hit him immediately. It was warm inside, almost stifling after the November chill, and a radio somewhere played classic rock at low volume. He chose a booth near the back, one that gave him a clear view of the counter, and there she was. Lena Carter was younger than he'd expected, mid-20s maybe. Dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, minimal makeup, a black uniform that had seen better days. She moved efficiently behind the counter, refilling coffee cups and taking orders with a smile that seemed genuine despite the obvious exhaustion in her eyes. Nathan watched her for 10 minutes, studying every interaction. She laughed at an old man's joke. She remembered a regular's usual order without being asked. She handled a complaining customer with patience that seemed effortless. Nothing about her screamed gold digger or con artist, which only made him more suspicious. "Coffee?" Lena appeared at his table, order pad in hand. Up close, he could see the dark circles under her eyes, the calluses on her hands. Her voice was pleasant but professional, the tone of someone who had served thousands of customers and would serve thousands more. "Black, please," Nathan said, studying her face for any sign of recognition. There was none. She simply nodded and turned away, returning moments later with a steaming mug. Nathan wrapped his hands around it, letting the warmth seep into his fingers. "Anything else?" she asked. "Actually," Nathan said carefully, "I'm looking for someone." "Lena Carter?" Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Wariness, maybe. "That's me. Can I help you?" "My name is Nathan Reed." Now her face did change. Her eyes widened slightly, and her grip on the coffee pot tightened. For a moment, she simply stared at him, and Nathan could see her mind working, processing the implications of his presence. "I see," she said finally, her voice quieter now. "I'm sorry about your father." The words sounded sincere, which only irritated him more. "Did you know him well?" "No." Lena glanced around the diner, clearly aware that they were attracting attention. "Look, I'm working. If you want to talk, I get off in an hour. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks down." "I'll wait," Nathan interrupted. She nodded slowly, then walked away without another word. Nathan watched her return to work, serving customers and clearing tables as if nothing had happened. But he noticed the slight tremor in her hands when she thought no one was looking. 63 minutes later, Lena emerged from the back room in jeans and a worn jacket. She'd let her hair down, and without the uniform, she looked even younger. Vulnerable. Nathan stood and followed her outside. The coffee shop she'd mentioned was a small, independent place, the kind with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. They found a table in the back corner, away from the handful of other customers. "You knew Harold Reed," Nathan said without preamble once they'd sat down. It wasn't a question. "I met him once," Lena replied, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of tea. He left his wallet at the diner. I returned it. That's all. That's all? Nathan's laugh was cold. He left you $5 million and 10% of my company because you returned his wallet. I didn't know about any of that until yesterday, Lena said, meeting his eyes directly. A lawyer showed up at my apartment with papers and a letter. I thought it was a mistake. It is a mistake, Nathan said flatly. Or a scam. I haven't decided which yet. Lena's jaw tightened. I didn't ask for anything. I didn't even know who he was that night. Convenient. It's the truth. Her voice remained steady despite the anger Nathan could see building in her eyes. Look, Mr. Reed, I understand you're upset. Your father just died, and now there's some stranger in his will. But I didn't manipulate him. I didn't seduce him. I returned his wallet because it was the right thing to do. That's it. Nathan studied her face, looking for cracks in the facade. She held his gaze without flinching, and he found himself reluctantly impressed by her composure. Did you expect something in return? He asked, changing tactics. When you returned the wallet? A clear conscience, Lena said simply. That's what I told him, and that's what I meant. The phrase hit Nathan like a physical blow. Those exact words were in his father's letter, the sealed one that Preston had finally given him to read. She asked for nothing but a clear conscience. In 30 years of business, no one has ever said that to me. His suspicion wavered just slightly. I have a proposal, Nathan said abruptly. Come work for me. At Reed Holdings. Lena blinked. What? As my assistant. I need someone I can observe closely. Someone who knew my father in his final weeks. The lie came easily. What he really needed was to keep her close, to figure out what game she was playing before she could do more damage. You want me to work for you? Lena repeated slowly. So you can investigate me. I want to understand what my father saw in you. Nathan corrected. Call it curiosity. Call it paranoia. Lena shot back. But he could see her considering it, could see the calculations happening behind those tired eyes. The money would be better than the diner. The opportunity might be worth the suspicion. I'll do it, she said finally, but not because I have anything to hide. Because I want you to see that I'm telling the truth. We'll see, Nathan said, standing and pulling out a business card. Monday morning, 8 a.m. Don't be late. He left her sitting there, her tea growing cold, and walked back to his car with a strange feeling he couldn't quite name. She wasn't what he'd expected. The con artists he'd encountered before were smoother, more polished. Lena Carter seemed genuinely confused by her inheritance, almost uncomfortable with it, which meant she was either an extraordinary actress or telling the truth. Nathan was determined to find out which. Lena's first day at Reed Holdings started with a lie. She told herself she was there to prove her innocence, to show Nathan Reed that she wasn't the villain he thought she was. But standing in the lobby of the gleaming glass tower on Monday morning, surrounded by people in designer suits and expensive watches, she felt like an imposter. The receptionist directed her to the 42nd floor, and the elevator ride felt like ascending into another world. When the doors opened, she stepped into a space that screamed wealth and power. Polished marble floors, contemporary art on the walls, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of Boston Harbor. Miss Carter? A young woman in a crisp blazer approached with a professional smile. I'm Sarah Chen, Mr. Reed's executive assistant. I'll be showing you around today. The tour was brief but overwhelming. Conference rooms with tables that could seat 20. A break room that looked like a boutique cafe. Offices with views that probably cost more per square foot than Lena's entire apartment. Everyone they passed stared at her with thinly veiled curiosity, and Lena knew they'd all heard about the mysterious woman in Harold Reed's will. Your desk is here, Sarah said, gesturing to a workspace just outside Nathan's office. You'll be handling his schedule, correspondence, and various administrative tasks. It's demanding work, but Mr. Reed values efficiency above all else. Lena was about to respond when Nathan's door opened. He emerged looking exactly as he had in the coffee shop, perfectly tailored suit, expression carefully neutral, eyes that missed nothing. Miss Carter, he said with a nod. Sarah will get you set up with access credentials. We have a board meeting at 10. I'll need you to take notes. He disappeared back into his office before she could reply. Sarah handed her a tablet and walked her through the basics of the company's systems, her voice patient but distant. Lena sensed the same wariness in her that she'd felt from everyone else. These people were loyal to Nathan, and she was an unknown variable. The morning passed in a blur of passwords and protocols. At 9:55, Sarah appeared at her desk with a leather portfolio and a pointed look. "Board meetings can be intense," she said. "Just stay quiet and observe unless Mr. Reed asks you directly." The boardroom was on the 45th floor, and it was even more intimidating than Lena had imagined. A massive glass table dominated the space, surrounded by chairs that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Nathan sat at the head, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp, and across from him, in a burgundy suit that fit like it had been custom-made, sat a woman who made Lena's blood run cold, Vanessa Brooks. Their eyes met across the boardroom, and for one endless moment, the world seemed to stop. Vanessa's perfectly made-up face registered shock, then recognition, then something that looked almost like triumph. She smiled slowly, the kind of smile that promised pain. "Well," Vanessa said, her voice honey-sweet and poisonous, "this is unexpected." Lena forced herself to breathe normally, to keep her expression neutral. She hadn't seen Vanessa in 3 years. Not since the night everything had fallen apart, since the accusations and the lies and the betrayal that had cost Lena everything. "You two know each other?" Nathan asked, his gaze sharp as it moved between them. "We were roommates," Vanessa said before Lena could speak. "At Columbia, such a small world, isn't it?" The lie was so smooth, so casual, that Lena almost believed it herself. They hadn't been roommates. They'd been best friends, closer than sisters, until Vanessa had stolen Lena's research, forged her signature on falsified data, and let Lena take the fall for academic fraud. "Fascinating," Nathan said, and Lena couldn't tell if he believed Vanessa or not. The meeting began, and Lena tried to focus on taking notes. But she could feel Vanessa's eyes on her throughout, could sense the wheels turning in that brilliant, ruthless mind. By the time the meeting ended 2 hours later, Lena's hands were shaking. She made it back to her desk and collapsed into her chair, her heart hammering. Of all the companies in Boston, of all the people she could have encountered, it had to be Vanessa. The woman who had destroyed her academic career, who had walked away with a prestigious position while Lena's name was mud, who had never once expressed remorse for what she'd done. "Lena?" Sarah appeared at her desk, her expression concerned. "Are you all right? You look pale." "Fine," Lena managed, just adjusting to everything. But she wasn't fine, because she knew Vanessa, knew how that mind worked, and she knew with absolute certainty that Vanessa wouldn't let this opportunity pass. Whatever game Nathan Reed was playing by hiring her, Vanessa would find a way to use it against her. The trap was already closing, and Lena had walked right into it. That evening, as Lena left the building and stepped into the cold November air, she had no idea that Vanessa was already 3 steps ahead. In her corner office, Vanessa sat at her desk with a smile on her face and her phone in her hand, scrolling through old files she'd kept as insurance. "So the little waitress thinks she can play in the big leagues," Vanessa murmured to herself. "Let's see how long that lasts." She began typing an email, her fingers moving with practiced precision. The seeds of doubt were always easiest to plant when wrapped in concern. And Nathan Reed, for all his intelligence, was still grieving his father and desperate for answers. Vanessa knew exactly how to give him the wrong ones. The sabotage began so subtly that at first Lena didn't even notice. It started with small things. An email she'd supposedly sent but had no memory of writing. A meeting time she'd confirmed that turned out to be wrong, leaving Nathan waiting in an empty conference room. A financial report that somehow got marked as reviewed by her when she'd never even seen it. "Miss Carter," Nathan said one morning, his voice tight with controlled anger, "can you explain why the Patterson contract was filed incorrectly?" Lena looked up from her desk, her stomach dropping. "I didn't file the Patterson contract. Sarah handles all contract filings. According to the system logs, you accessed it yesterday at 3:47 p.m. and made changes to the terms. That's impossible. I was in the archives room yesterday afternoon. Sarah sent me to retrieve the quarterly reports from 2019. Nathan's eyes narrowed. "The archives room doesn't have computer access." "Exactly," Lena said, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. "So I couldn't have accessed anything at 3:47. For a moment, Nathan seemed to consider this. Then his expression hardened again. "Maybe you accessed it before you went to the archives." "I didn't touch that contract," Lena insisted. But she could see the doubt in his eyes, could feel the trust, what little there was, beginning to crack. Someone was setting her up, and she had a pretty good idea who. Over the next 2 weeks, the incidents escalated. Important documents went missing from Nathan's desk, only to be found in Lena's drawer. Confidential information somehow made its way to competitors. A major client complained that someone from Nathan's office had been inappropriately friendly, even flirtatious, during a phone call, and the call log showed it had come from Lena's extension. The whispers started spreading through the office like poison. She heard them in the break room, saw them in the sideways glances and knowing smiles. The mysterious woman from the will was showing her true colors. She was after Nathan now, just like she'd gotten to his father. Vanessa orchestrated it all with surgical precision. A forged email here, a manipulated timestamp there, a carefully placed rumor delivered with feigned concern. She was too smart to do anything traceable, too experienced to leave evidence. And she had something Lena didn't: credibility. She'd been with Reed Holdings for 2 years, had Nathan's trust, and knew exactly how to exploit his suspicions. "I'm worried about Lena," Vanessa said to Nathan one afternoon, her voice carefully modulated to sound concerned rather than accusatory. "I know you have your reasons for hiring her, but some of the staff are uncomfortable. And after what happened at Columbia—" Nathan looked up from his laptop. "What happened at Columbia?" Vanessa's eyes widened, as if she'd said too much. "Oh, I thought you knew. It's probably nothing. Ancient history, really. I shouldn't have brought it up." "What happened?" Nathan repeated, his voice harder now. Vanessa hesitated, playing the role perfectly. There were some accusations of academic fraud, falsified research data. She was asked to leave the program. "I always believed there might have been extenuating circumstances, but—" She trailed off with a delicate shrug. The seed was planted. Nathan said nothing, but Vanessa could see it taking root behind those gray eyes. The explosion came 3 days later. Nathan had called an emergency executive meeting to discuss a major acquisition. The deal had been months in the making, worth over $50 million, and required absolute discretion. Only the top executives and Nathan's personal assistant, Lena, had access to the details. Lena arrived at the conference room to find Nathan pacing like a caged animal, his face darker than she'd ever seen it. The executives sat in tense silence, and Vanessa stood by the window with an expression that managed to be both sympathetic and accusatory. "Sit down, Miss Carter," Nathan said, his voice deadly quiet. Lena sat, her heart pounding. Something was very wrong. Nathan threw a folder onto the table in front of her. It slid across the polished surface and stopped at her hands. "Want to explain this?" She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were emails, dozens of them, all sent from her account to a competitor, detailing every aspect of the acquisition deal. Prices, terms, strategy, everything. "I didn't send these," Lena said immediately. "Nathan, I swear, I would never—" "The security logs don't lie," Nathan interrupted. "These were sent from your computer using your credentials during hours when you were the only one in the office. Someone must have accessed my account. With your password? The one you created yourself and supposedly never shared?" His voice was rising now, the control slipping. "My father trusted you. He left you a fortune because he thought you were honest. And this entire time, you've been playing us all." "No!" Lena stood abruptly. "Nathan, please, just listen." "You seduced my father," Nathan said, and each word felt like a blade. "You manipulated a dying man, got yourself written into his will, and now you're trying to destroy everything he built. Well, congratulations, Miss Carter. You almost succeeded." The room was silent except for the sound of Lena's ragged breathing. She looked around at the faces staring at her, executives who'd never trusted her, Sarah, who looked away uncomfortably, and Vanessa, whose expression of concerned sympathy didn't quite hide the gleam of victory in her eyes. "You're fired," Nathan said flatly. "Security will escort you out. Consider yourself lucky I'm not pressing charges. Nathan, get out." 2 security guards appeared at the door, as if they'd been waiting. Lena felt their hands on her arms, firm but not rough, guiding her toward the exit. She caught one last glimpse of Nathan's face, hard and cold and utterly convinced of her guilt, before they led her into the hallway. The walk to the elevator felt like a death march. Employees stepped aside to watch her pass, their expressions ranging from curiosity to satisfaction. The guards stayed with her until she'd collected her few personal items from her desk, then escorted her all the way down to the lobby. It was raining when she stepped outside, a cold, bitter rain that matched the numbness spreading through her chest. She stood on the sidewalk in her thin jacket, watching the glass tower of Reed Holdings disappear into the gray sky, and felt the weight of 3 years of injustice crash down on her all at once. Vanessa had won again. But as Lena walked toward the subway station, water soaking through her shoes and tears mixing with the rain on her face, something inside her shifted. She'd run once before, had let Vanessa's lies chase her out of Colombia and into obscurity. She'd spent 3 years hiding, working dead-end jobs, convincing herself that fighting back was pointless. Not this time. She thought of Harold Reed, the old man who'd smiled at her in the rain and talked about restored faith. She thought of Nathan's face when she'd returned that wallet, the genuine honesty of that moment before everything got complicated. And she thought of the metal box hidden in the back of her closet at home, the one containing 3 years of evidence she'd been too afraid to use. Emails, documents, records that proved exactly what Vanessa had done at Columbia. Proof that Lena had kept as insurance, never quite able to throw away. By the time she reached her apartment, her clothes were soaked, but her resolve was steel. She pulled the box from its hiding place and opened it with shaking hands. Everything was still there, preserved and damning. Vanessa thought she'd won. Nathan thought Lena was a liar and a thief. The entire company thought she was a gold digger who'd finally been exposed. They were all about to learn the truth, but Lena would need help. Someone who knew Harold Reed, who might believe in the man's judgment, even when his son didn't. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through the business cards she'd been given during her brief time at Reed Holdings. There, near the bottom, Mrs. Margaret Green, Reed Family Estate Manager. The number rang 3 times before a warm, slightly raspy voice answered. Green residence. Mrs. Green, Lena said, her voice steadier than she felt. My name is Lena Carter. I need your help. There was a pause then. I know who you are, dear. Harold spoke of you. What's happened? And for the first time since that terrible meeting, Lena felt a spark of hope. The annual Reed Foundation Gala was the social event of the season, a glittering celebration of wealth, power, and carefully calculated philanthropy. Held at the historic Fairmont Copley Plaza, the event drew Boston's elite like moths to a flame. This year, it carried added significance. It would be Nathan Reed's first major public appearance since taking over his father's empire. Nathan stood in the grand ballroom, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and designer gowns, feeling nothing but exhaustion. He'd thrown himself into work since firing Lena 3 weeks ago, burying his doubts under 18-hour days. It wasn't working. Her face still haunted him, the shock and hurt in her eyes when he'd accused her. You look miserable, Vanessa said, appearing at his elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. She wore a stunning red gown, and her smile was perfectly calibrated to look sympathetic. Still thinking about her? I'm thinking about the merger, Nathan lied, accepting the champagne but not drinking it. He'll come around. You made the right call with Lena, you know. Vanessa's hand touched his arm lightly. She was toxic for the company. Nathan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. In the week since Lena's firing, Vanessa had been indispensable, working late hours, handling crises with calm efficiency. She was everything an executive should be, so why did he feel uneasy around her? Ladies and gentlemen, the MC's voice boomed. If you could please take your seats, we'll be beginning the evening's program shortly. The crowd moved toward the elaborately decorated tables. Nathan found his seat at the head table, Vanessa sliding smoothly into the chair beside him. Board members and major donors filled the surrounding spots. The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage where Vanessa would give the keynote address. She'd spent weeks preparing, and Nathan knew it would be polished and perfect. Vanessa stood and walked to the podium with practiced grace. The audience applauded politely. She smiled, waiting for silence, then began to speak. Thank you all for being here tonight. The Reed Foundation has always been about more than just charitable giving. It's about building a better world through integrity, compassion, and the courage to do what's right. Nathan listened with half his attention, his mind wandering to the persistent feeling that something was wrong. The lights went out. Complete, absolute darkness swallowed the ballroom. Gasps and confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Before Nathan could reach for his phone, the massive screens flanking the stage blazed to life. And there, in stark black and white, were documents, emails, financial records. Nathan's blood ran cold as he recognized the header, Reed Holdings Internal Audit, 2022. The documents scrolled slowly, methodically. Bank transfers, falsified expense reports, forged signatures, and in the corner of every single page, highlighted in yellow, was the same name, Vanessa Brooks. The ballroom erupted. People were standing, pointing at the screens, pulling out their phones. Nathan sat frozen, his mind racing. These weren't just recent crimes. Some of these documents dated back years, long before Lena had ever set foot in Reed Holdings. Then the video started. Harold Reed's face filled the screens, and the room fell silent. He was sitting in his study. The timestamp showed it was recorded 2 days before his death. "If you're watching this," Harold's voice was clear and strong, "then something has happened to me, and the truth needs to be told." Nathan's heart hammered. "For the past 6 months, I've been conducting a private investigation into financial irregularities within Reed Holdings. What I discovered was systematic fraud orchestrated by someone I trusted." Harold paused, his expression grave. "Vanessa Brooks has been embezzling funds, manipulating contracts, and falsifying records for over 2 years. The evidence is irrefutable." The screen switched to show more documents. Bank statements showing money funneled into offshore accounts, contracts altered after signing, a trail of financial crimes that would take years to fully unravel. "I confronted her 3 weeks ago," Harold continued. "She denied everything, but I had proof. I was planning to go to the authorities after settling my affairs." His expression softened. "That's when I met Lena Carter." Nathan felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. "A young woman who returned my wallet in the rain, who asked for nothing in return, who reminded me that integrity still exists in this world. I added her to my will not as payment, but as a message. To Nathan, to everyone, that honesty matters, that good people still exist." The video faded to black. The house lights came up slowly, revealing a ballroom in chaos. Reporters were shouting questions. Security guards were moving toward the stage, and Vanessa was running. She'd kicked off her heels and was sprinting toward the back exit, her red dress billowing behind her. But she made it less than 10 feet before 2 police officers stepped into her path. "Vanessa Brooks," one officer said, pulling out handcuffs, "you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and falsification of business records." "This is insane." Vanessa's polished facade cracked. "Those documents are fake. Nathan, tell them." But Nathan wasn't looking at her. His eyes were scanning the crowd, searching, and there, standing near the back of the room in a simple black dress, was Lena. Next to her stood Mrs. Green, her silver hair gleaming under the chandeliers and her expression quietly triumphant. Nathan stood and began walking toward them. The crowd parted automatically. Behind him, he could hear Vanessa screaming as the officers led her away. Cameras flashed. Lena watched him approach, her chin lifted and her eyes dry. Though he could see they were red-rimmed, she didn't look vindicated. She just looked tired. "You were right," Nathan said when he reached her. "About everything." "Don't," Lena interrupted quietly. "Not here. Not now." Mrs. Green touched Lena's arm gently. "Harold would be proud, dear. You did what he hoped you'd do." Nathan looked at the older woman. "You helped her." "I helped the truth," Mrs. Green corrected. Harold left instructions, a recording, evidence he'd compiled. "When Lena came to me 3 weeks ago, I knew it was time." "Why didn't you come to me?" Nathan asked. "Would you have believed her?" Mrs. Green's gaze was kind but unflinching. "You'd already made up your mind, Mr. Reed." She was right. Nathan turned back to Lena, trying to find words. But before he could speak, a reporter shoved a microphone between them. "Miss Carter, how does it feel to be vindicated?" More reporters crowded in. Nathan instinctively moved closer to Lena, but she stepped forward instead. "The truth always comes out eventually," she said, her voice steady. "That's all that matters." Then she turned and walked toward the exit, Mrs. Green at her side, leaving Nathan standing in the chaos. He watched her go, watched the way she held herself with quiet dignity, and felt something shift in his chest. His father had been right about her, and Nathan had been catastrophically wrong. The media frenzy that followed the gala was unlike anything Boston had seen in years. Video footage of Vanessa's arrest went viral within hours, racking up millions of views. News outlets ran 24-hour coverage, dissecting every detail of the fraud. Legal experts debated the case on morning shows, and at the center of it all was Lena Carter, the waitress who'd returned a wallet and somehow brought down a corporate criminal. Nathan spent the days after the gala in damage control mode. Emergency board meetings, calls with lawyers, press conferences where he had to admit his company had been compromised, that his judgment had failed. The stock price took a hit. Investors demanded answers. But underneath the crisis management, Nathan couldn't stop thinking about Lena's face when he'd fired her. He'd called her a liar and a manipulator. He'd had her escorted out by security, and she'd been innocent the entire time. The police investigation moved quickly once they had Harold's evidence. Vanessa's offshore accounts were frozen. Her apartment was searched, yielding more incriminating documents. Forensic accountants traced the embezzlement back 3 years, uncovering fraud that totaled over $8 million. But that wasn't all they found. Mr. Reed? Detective Sarah Morrison sat across from Nathan in his office, her expression grim. We need to talk about Columbia University. Nathan's stomach dropped. What about it? 3 years ago, there was an academic fraud case. A graduate student named Lena Carter was accused of falsifying research data and expelled. Morrison slid a folder across his desk. Turns out it was Vanessa Brooks who committed the fraud. She was Lena's research partner. When the university started investigating, Vanessa planted evidence in Lena's files and disappeared before anyone could question her. Nathan opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were emails, documents, testimony from professors who'd had doubts but lacked proof. And there was Lena's academic record, brilliant grades, glowing recommendations, a promising career destroyed in a single semester. Lena kept copies of everything. Morrison continued. She came to us after she was fired from Reed Holdings, brought us everything, the Columbia evidence, research into company finances, Harold Reed's sealed instructions that Mrs. Green had been holding. She built the entire case herself. Why didn't she use this evidence 3 years ago? Nathan asked. Because Vanessa was brilliant at covering her tracks, and Lena was a 22-year-old grad student with no resources. By the time she'd gathered enough evidence, the university had closed the case. Morrison stood. But now, Columbia's already announced they're reviewing the case. Lena Carter's about to get her life back. After the detective left, Nathan sat alone in his office as evening fell over Boston. He thought about the girl in the diner who'd run into the rain to return a wallet. She'd been carrying the weight of false accusations for 3 years, and still, when a stranger left his wallet behind, she'd done the right thing without hesitation. His father had seen something in her that Nathan had been too blind to recognize. The trial was swift. With the mountain of evidence and Harold's video testimony, Vanessa's expensive lawyers had little room to maneuver. She tried to claim the documents were fabricated, that Harold had been senile. None of it held up. Nathan attended the sentencing hearing, sitting in the back of the courtroom. Vanessa was barely recognizable, her designer clothes replaced with an orange jumpsuit, her confident bearing shattered. When the judge sentenced her to 15 years in federal prison, she just crumpled. Lena was there too, sitting on the opposite side with Mrs. Green. She didn't look triumphant. She just looked like someone who'd finally put down a weight she'd been carrying too long. Their eyes met once across the courtroom. Nathan tried to convey everything he was feeling, the remorse, the admiration. Lena held his gaze for a moment, then looked away. The press was waiting outside the courthouse. Nathan watched from a distance as Lena emerged with Mrs. Green. The questions came rapidly, but Lena's voice carried clearly when she spoke. "I'm grateful that the truth came out," she said. "But this isn't about revenge. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to someone else. I'm planning to use the inheritance Harold Reed left me to start a foundation. We'll provide legal assistance to people who've been falsely accused, especially women who face institutional bias." The reporters erupted with follow-up questions, but Lena was already descending the steps. Nathan watched until they disappeared from view. She wasn't going to sue. She wasn't going to seek revenge. She was going to use her pain to help others. His father had seen exactly who she was. That evening, Nathan sat in his father's study and poured himself scotch. He raised the glass toward the empty chair where Harold used to sit. "You were right," he said to the silence. "About everything." Tomorrow he would begin making amends. But tonight, he just sat and wished he'd trusted his father's judgment from the beginning. The rain had returned to Boston, softer this time, washing the city clean under a steel gray sky. Nathan stood on the rooftop terrace of Reed Holdings, 50 floors above the street, watching water bead on the glass railing. It had been 2 weeks since Vanessa's sentencing, 2 weeks of sleepless nights and unanswered questions. He'd tried calling Lena 6 times. Each call went to voicemail. He'd sent emails that received no response. He'd even gone to her apartment, only to find she'd moved. Mrs. Green, when he'd finally visited her, had simply smiled and said, "Give her time, Mr. Reed. Some wounds need space to heal." The terrace door opened behind him. Nathan didn't turn, assuming it was his assistant, but then he caught the reflection in the glass railing, a slight figure in a simple gray coat, dark hair loose around her shoulders. Lena. He turned slowly, afraid she might disappear. She stood near the door, one hand still on the handle as if ready to flee. The rain had dampened her hair and droplets clung to her eyelashes. She looked thinner than he remembered. "Mrs. Green said you've been looking for me," Lena said quietly. Nathan's throat tightened. "Every day since the trial. I needed time to think, to figure out what I wanted to say to you. I'm sorry." The words burst out before he could stop them. "I know that's inadequate. I know it doesn't fix anything. But I need you to know. I was wrong about everything. My father saw something in you that I was too blind to see." Lena was quiet for a long moment. "Do you know what hurt the most? It wasn't the accusations or being fired. It was that you never gave me a chance to prove my innocence. You decided I was guilty, and nothing I said mattered." "I know." Nathan's hands clenched at his sides. "I let my suspicions poison everything. I was so convinced you'd manipulated my father that I couldn't see the truth." "Your father was a remarkable man," Lena said, her voice softening. "That night in the rain, when I returned his wallet, he looked at me like I'd given him something precious. He'd spent so long surrounded by people who wanted something from him that simple honesty felt like a miracle. He left you that inheritance as a message," Nathan said. "To me, to everyone. That integrity still exists. And you thought I'd proven him wrong." There was no accusation in her words, just sad acceptance. Nathan moved closer. "My father trusted his instincts about people. I trusted spreadsheets and background checks. I thought that made me smart. Turns out, it just made me blind." The wind picked up, carrying rain across the terrace. Lena shivered slightly, and Nathan instinctively shrugged off his jacket and held it out. She hesitated, then accepted it, pulling the fabric around her shoulders. "I don't want your money," Lena said suddenly. "The inheritance, the stock, I'm signing it all back to you. That's what I came to tell you." Nathan's eyes widened. "What? No, that money is yours. My father wanted you to have it." "Your father wanted to make a point. He did. The money has served its purpose." Lena's voice was firm. "I don't need millions of dollars to do what I want to do. Mrs. Green and I have already started the foundation with my own savings. We've helped 3 women in the past 2 weeks. That's what matters." "You're really going to help people who've been through what you went through," Nathan said. "Someone has to. The system failed me. It fails people every day. If I can use what happened to me to prevent it from happening to others, then maybe the past 3 years weren't completely wasted." Nathan studied her face, the quiet strength, the genuine compassion despite everything she'd endured. "My father was right about you. I'm just someone who knows what it's like to be powerless," Lena replied, "and who wants to give others the power to fight back." They stood in silence, the rain falling softly around them. The city stretched below, millions of lights beginning to flicker on as evening approached. "Keep the inheritance," Nathan said abruptly. "Not for yourself, for the foundation. You said you want to help people? Then take the money my father left you and do it properly. Hire lawyers, create programs, build something that lasts." That's what he would have wanted. Lena looked at him sharply. "I don't want charity. It's not charity. It's justice." Nathan took another step closer. "You said the system failed you, so change the system. You have the resources now. Use them." "And what do you get out of this?" Lena asked. "Absolution. I get to honor my father's last wish," Nathan said quietly. "He believed in you. The least I can do is support that belief, even if I was too stupid to see it myself." The rain was falling harder now, soaking through Nathan's shirt. Lena stood before him, his jacket wrapped around her, and for the first time since his father's death, Nathan felt like he understood what the old man had been trying to teach him. "I need time," Lena said finally, "to forgive you, to trust you, to believe that you've actually changed." "I'll wait," Nathan replied, "however long it takes." Lena nodded slowly, then turned toward the door. She paused with her hand on the handle and looked back. "Your father told me something that night in the rain. He said, faith in humanity is like a muscle. If you don't exercise it, it atrophies. I think he was trying to tell me not to give up on people." "He was telling both of us," Nathan said. Lena's smile was small but genuine. Maybe he was. She left then, disappearing through the door and leaving Nathan alone on the rain-soaked terrace. But something had shifted between them, some invisible thread of possibility that hadn't existed before. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't trust, but it was a beginning. Nathan stood in the rain, watching the city lights blur through the water, and felt something he hadn't felt in weeks: hope. 6 months later, Lena stood in front of a restored brownstone in the South End, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp spring air. The building had once been a law office, then sat abandoned for 3 years before she'd found it. Now, freshly painted in cream and forest green, it housed something Boston had never seen before. The brass plaque beside the door read, "Reed Carter Foundation for Justice." Today was the official opening, and despite the early hour, a small crowd had already gathered. Reporters with cameras, former clients clutching thank you letters, advocates from other organizations curious about this new player in the justice reform space. And standing near the steps, looking slightly uncomfortable in a tailored suit, was Nathan Reed. Their eyes met across the crowd. He offered a tentative smile, and Lena felt her heart skip, a sensation she'd been trying to ignore for weeks now. Since that rainy evening on the terrace, they'd been working together on the foundation, their relationship carefully professional, marked by an undercurrent of something neither dared acknowledge. Mrs. Green emerged from inside the building, her silver hair perfectly styled, wearing a navy dress that made her look 10 years younger. She'd thrown herself into the foundation with surprising energy, becoming its unofficial heart and conscience. "Ready, dear?" she asked Lena quietly. Lena nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. Public speaking still terrified her, even after everything she'd been through. But this mattered too much to let fear win. She climbed the steps and turned to face the crowd. Cameras flashed, microphones tilted toward her. Nathan stood at the back, his expression encouraging. 3 years ago, Lena began, her voice steadier than she felt, "I was expelled from Columbia University for academic fraud I didn't commit. I lost my career, my reputation, and my future, all because someone I trusted betrayed me, and the system designed to protect innocent people failed." The crowd was silent, attentive. Even the reporters had stopped their usual rustling. "I'm not unique. Every day people, especially women, are falsely accused, and they have nowhere to turn. The legal system is expensive and slow. Institutions protect themselves first, and victims are left to prove their innocence with no resources and no support." Lena paused, gathering her courage. "The Reed Carter Foundation exists to change that. We provide free legal representation, investigative services, and emotional support to anyone facing false accusations. We fight institutional bias. We demand accountability, and we refuse to let another person suffer what I suffered." Applause erupted, genuine and enthusiastic. Lena saw tears in some faces, determination in others. Mrs. Green squeezed her hand, pride shining in her eyes. Nathan stepped forward then, climbing the steps to stand beside Lena. The crowd quieted again, curious. "My father, Harold Reed, believed that integrity was the most valuable currency in the world," Nathan said, his voice carrying clearly. "He saw that integrity in Lena Carter when she returned his wallet on a rainy night, asking for nothing in return. He left her his inheritance not as payment, but as investment, in her, in honesty, in the belief that good people still exist and deserve our support." He turned to look at Lena, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "I failed to see what my father saw. I let suspicion blind me to the truth standing right in front of me. But Lena didn't give up, didn't let my mistakes define her. She took pain and injustice and transformed them into purpose." Nathan's voice softened. "This foundation is her vision, her fight, her gift to everyone who's been where she was. Reed Holdings is honored to support it, and I'm humbled to stand beside her today." The crowd applauded again, louder this time, but Lena barely heard it. She was staring at Nathan, seeing something in his face that made her heart race: vulnerability, admiration, and something deeper she wasn't quite ready to name. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Tours of the facility, interviews with reporters, meetings with their first official clients. Lena met a young teacher accused of impropriety by a vindictive parent, a nurse facing termination over falsified complaints, a journalist threatened with defamation charges for exposing corruption. Each story broke her heart and strengthened her resolve. By late afternoon, the crowd had dispersed. Mrs. Green had gone home to rest, promising to return tomorrow. The staff had left for the day. And Lena found herself alone in her office, a modest room with a desk, 2 chairs, and a window overlooking a small garden. She was reviewing case files when Nathan knocked softly on the door frame. "Mind if I come in?" Lena looked up, surprised. "Of course." Nathan entered carrying 2 paper cups of coffee from the cafe down the street. He handed one to Lena, then settled into the chair across from her desk. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping coffee and listening to the city sounds drifting through the open window. "Your speech was remarkable," Nathan said finally. "My father would have been proud." "I was terrified," Lena admitted. "Mrs. Green practically had to push me out the door." Nathan smiled. "You didn't look terrified. You looked powerful, like you'd finally found where you belong." Lena considered this. "Maybe I have. For 3 years I felt like I was drifting, hiding, just trying to survive. But this, helping people, fighting for truth, it feels right, like all that pain had a purpose." "It did." Nathan leaned forward slightly. "You've already changed 3 lives in 6 months. That teacher you met today, she was ready to give up, resign before they could fire her. Now she has hope. That's because of you." "Because of us," Lena corrected. "The foundation wouldn't exist without your support, Nathan. The funding, the connections, the credibility. The vision is yours." Nathan interrupted gently. "I'm just lucky you let me be part of it." Their eyes met, and the air between them seemed to shift, charged with unspoken feelings. Lena's pulse quickened. She'd been trying so hard to maintain professional distance, to protect herself from the possibility of getting hurt again. But looking at Nathan now, seeing the genuine admiration in his eyes, the way he'd changed over these past months, she felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. "Nathan," she began. "I know," he said quietly. "I know you need time. I know I hurt you, and trust doesn't come back easily. I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know that working with you these past 6 months has been the most meaningful thing I've ever done. You've taught me more about integrity and courage than I learned in my entire life before." Lena's throat tightened. "You've changed. From the man who fired me to who you are now, you're different. You changed me," Nathan said simply. "You and my father. You showed me what really matters." The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and caution. Outside, the spring evening was settling over Boston, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Inside this small office, 2 people who'd been brought together by tragedy and suspicion were discovering something neither had expected. Not quite forgiveness yet, not quite trust, but something that felt like the beginning of both. 8 months after the foundation's opening, Lena received an invitation that made her hands shake. Harvard Law School wanted her to deliver the keynote address at their annual Ethics in Law Symposium. The letter, signed by the dean himself, praised her work with the Reed Carter Foundation and called her a living example of integrity, triumphing over injustice. She sat in her office, staring at the embossed letterhead, unable to process what she was reading. Harvard, the same institution that had once represented everything she'd lost, every dream that had been stolen from her. "That's quite an honor," Mrs. Green said from the doorway, having clearly read Lena's expression. "It's terrifying," Lena corrected. "Speaking to law students and professors about ethics when I was expelled from Columbia. They'll think I'm a fraud. They'll think you're someone who survived injustice and chose to fight it rather than let it define you." Mrs. Green entered the office and sat across from Lena. "That's not fraud, dear. That's heroism." But Lena's doubts persisted through the following weeks. She wrote and rewrote her speech a dozen times, each version feeling inadequate. Nathan offered to review it, but she kept putting him off, too self-conscious about revealing her insecurities. Their relationship had deepened over the months, evolving from cautious professionalism to genuine friendship. He visited the foundation regularly, took her to lunch to discuss cases, called late at night when a particularly difficult client's story kept him awake. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Lena's walls had begun to crumble. The night before the Harvard speech, she couldn't sleep. At 2 in the morning, she found herself walking through the foundation's quiet halls, seeking comfort in the space they'd built. She was standing in the library, a small room lined with legal texts and case files, when her phone buzzed. "Nathan, saw your office light was still on from the street. Can't sleep either." Lena smiled despite her anxiety and texted back, "Nervous about tomorrow." 3 minutes later, there was a knock on the foundation's front door. Nathan stood on the steps in jeans and a MIT sweatshirt, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. In his hands were 2 containers of ice cream from the 24-hour convenience store down the block. "Stress eating helps," he said with a slight smile. "Or so I've heard." They sat on the library floor, backs against the bookshelves, sharing ice cream straight from the containers. It should have felt ridiculous, 2 adults in their late 20s sitting on the floor at 2 in the morning, but instead, it felt perfect. "I'm afraid they'll see right through me," Lena admitted quietly. "That they'll realize I'm just a waitress who got lucky, not someone qualified to speak about law and ethics." Nathan set down his ice cream and turned to face her. "You know what I see when I look at you? Someone who lost everything and rebuilt herself. Someone who took pain and transformed it into purpose. Someone who fights for people who have no one else fighting for them." His voice was intense, sincere. "That's not luck, Lena. That's character." She met his eyes and something shifted in the air between them. They'd been dancing around this moment for months, both too cautious to make the first move. But sitting here in the quiet darkness, surrounded by the physical manifestation of everything they'd built together, pretense felt impossible. "I've forgiven you," Lena said softly. "I realized that weeks ago, maybe months. I just didn't know how to tell you." Nathan's breath caught. "Lena, your father was right about a lot of things, but the thing he was most right about was you. He knew you'd see the truth eventually. He believed you'd become the man he raised you to be." "I'm still trying," Nathan said quietly. "I know. That's why I—" She stopped, the words catching in her throat. But Nathan understood. He'd always understood, even when they were at odds. He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, and the simple touch felt like coming home. The Harvard speech the next day was a triumph. Lena stood before an auditorium filled with some of the brightest legal minds in the country and told her story, not with bitterness, but with hope. She spoke about systemic failures and institutional bias, about the courage required to keep fighting when the odds are impossible. She spoke about Harold Reed's faith in humanity and the foundation built on that faith, and when she finished, the auditorium rose in a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Nathan watched from the back row, his chest tight with pride and something deeper. After the speech, after the questions and congratulations and networking, he found her in the hallway outside the auditorium. "You were incredible," he said. Lena smiled, still glowing from the adrenaline. "I didn't freeze up or forget my lines, so I'm calling it a win." It was more than a win. It was perfect. Nathan hesitated, then took her hand. "Walk with me." They left the law school and walked through Harvard Yard as evening settled over Cambridge. Students hurried past with backpacks and coffee cups, oblivious to the 2 people whose lives had been so dramatically changed by institutions just like this one. "My father left me a letter," Nathan said as they walked. "Preston gave it to me months ago, but I couldn't bring myself to read it until last week." Lena glanced at him, seeing the emotion in his profile. "He wrote that he was proud of me, but worried I'd forgotten how to trust my instincts. He said the business world had made me cynical, that I saw threats everywhere and missed the beauty standing right in front of me." Nathan stopped walking and turned to face her. "He wrote about you, about how you'd reminded him that good people still exist, and he asked me to take care of you, to honor the faith he had in both of us." Lena's eyes filled with tears. "Nathan, I'm not saying this because of duty or obligation," Nathan continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm saying it because working with you, knowing you, watching you transform pain into purpose, it's changed me. You've changed me, and I don't want to go back to who I was before." The sun was setting behind them, painting Harvard Yard in gold and amber. Around them, the world continued its busy pace, but for Lena and Nathan, everything had narrowed to this moment. "Neither do I," Lena whispered. When Nathan kissed her, it felt like redemption and promise all at once. Not the dramatic, passionate kiss of romance novels, but something gentler, more profound. A kiss that acknowledged pain and offered healing. A kiss that said, "We've both been broken, and maybe together we can be whole." They walked back through Cambridge hand in hand as night fell. 2 people who'd been brought together by tragedy and suspicion, but had chosen to build something beautiful from the ruins. And somewhere, Lena thought, Harold Reed was smiling. 1 year after Harold Reed's death, Lena stood before his grave with white roses. The cemetery was quiet on this Tuesday morning, with only wind through old oaks and distant birdsong breaking the silence. The marble headstone was simple, elegant, inscribed with Harold's name and the dates that bookended his life. She knelt and placed the flowers at the base. "Thank you," she whispered, for believing in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. He had good instincts about people. Lena turned to find Nathan approaching with his own bouquet of white roses. He looked different than a year ago, lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. "I didn't know you were coming today," Lena said. "I come every Tuesday." Nathan knelt beside her, placing his roses next to hers. "Haven't missed one since the funeral." They stayed in silence for several minutes. The morning sun was warm on Lena's face. She thought about how her life had changed since that rainy night. The foundation was thriving. They'd helped 43 people clear their names. Columbia had officially reinstated her with honors. And then there was Nathan. "I've been thinking," Nathan said quietly, "about legacy, about what we leave behind." Lena looked at him. "Your father left quite a legacy. He left something more important." Nathan reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. "He left me a lesson about what really matters." Lena's heart stopped. The box was ring-sized, unmistakable. Her breath caught as Nathan opened it to reveal a simple silver band with a single diamond, elegant but understated. "This isn't about owing you anything," Nathan said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "It's not about guilt or making amends, and it's not about my father's wishes, though I know he'd approve." He took her hand. "This is about the fact that working beside you has shown me what partnership really means. It's about how you've taught me that strength is about integrity and compassion. It's about the way you fight for people who can't fight for themselves." Tears streamed down Lena's face. She stared at Nathan, at the vulnerability and love written on his face. "I'm not asking you to save me or fix me," Nathan continued. "I'm asking you to build a life with me, as equals, as partners, as two people who found each other in the worst circumstances and chose to create something beautiful." He held the ring between them. "Lena Carter, will you marry me?" The world seemed to hold its breath. Lena looked at the ring, then at Nathan's face, then at Harold's grave behind them. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the betrayal, the humiliation, the long nights of doubt, and she thought about the man kneeling before her, who'd made terrible mistakes but had found courage to change. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." Nathan slid the ring onto her finger with trembling hands. Then he stood, pulling her up, and kissed her with tenderness that made her heart ache. This wasn't desperate passion. It was something deeper, built on respect and understanding and hard-won trust. When they pulled apart, both laughing and crying, Lena noticed Mrs. Green standing near a large oak tree. The older woman was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "How long have you been standing there?" Lena called out. "Long enough," Mrs. Green replied, walking toward them. "Oh, you two. Harold would be absolutely delighted." She embraced them both. The three of them stood beside Harold's grave, an unlikely family bound by tragedy and trust. "He knew, you know," Mrs. Green said softly. "Harold, that last week he told me he thought you two would find each other. He said they're both so stubborn and broken in exactly the right ways. If they can stop fighting long enough to see it, they'll heal each other." Nathan laughed. He was a romantic under all that business armor. "He was a believer in second chances," Mrs. Green corrected, "and in love that's earned rather than given freely." They stayed at the cemetery for another hour, sharing stories about Harold, making plans for the wedding, talking about the future they'd build together. The foundation would continue to grow. Nathan would remain involved with Reed Holdings, but dedicate more time to their shared mission. As they prepared to leave, Lena turned back to Harold's grave. The white roses glowed in the afternoon sun. "Thank you," she said again, "for everything, for seeing me, for believing, for bringing us together." The wind picked up, rustling through oak leaves. Nathan took Lena's hand, the new ring catching light, and together they walked toward the cemetery gates. Behind them, Mrs. Green lingered at the grave. "You did good, Harold," she murmured. "They're going to be just fine. They're going to change the world, those two, just like you knew they would." 5 years had passed since the rain-soaked night when Lena Carter had returned a wallet to a stranger. The Reed Carter Foundation now operated in 12 states, with satellite offices in major cities across the East Coast. What had started as a modest brownstone had grown into a nationwide network dedicated to fighting false accusations. The foundation's success rate was remarkable, 87% exoneration for their clients. Lena still came to the original Boston office every day. She preferred being on the ground floor, meeting with clients, ensuring the foundation never lost sight of its core mission. This morning, she reviewed a case file. A young medical resident faced criminal charges for allegedly stealing narcotics. The evidence seemed damning, but Lena had learned to look deeper. "Still reviewing that hospital case?" Nathan asked from the doorway, 2 cups of coffee in his hands, a morning ritual they'd maintained throughout their marriage. Lena looked up and smiled. Her husband of 3 years still made her heart skip. Marriage had taught them that partnership meant supporting each other's growth. "Something doesn't add up with the timestamps," Lena said. "I think someone in administration is covering for the real thief." Nathan settled across from her, scanning the file. He'd stepped back from Reed Holdings 2 years ago, focusing on the foundation. The business world had been surprised, but Nathan had learned what his father knew, that legacy wasn't measured in dollars, but in lives changed. "The head pharmacist," Nathan said, pointing to a name. "She's the only one with opportunity who isn't being investigated." Lena's eyes widened. "She's deflecting blame onto residents because they're easy targets. Think you can prove it?" "I know I can." Lena reached for her phone. This was what she lived for when injustice became visible and defeatable. The morning passed productively. Lena interviewed 2 new clients, approved funding for investigations, and participated in a video conference with their California office. By noon, she was exhausted but satisfied. Mrs. Green arrived at lunchtime with homemade sandwiches. At 73, she showed no signs of slowing. She served as the foundation's heart and conscience. "The Johnson case settled," Mrs. Green announced. "Full exoneration, public apology, and policy changes to protect other teachers." "That's wonderful," Lena said. They ate lunch together, Lena, Nathan, and Mrs. Green, talking about cases and daily life. Despite the foundation's growth, they remained grounded in relationships rather than prestige. After lunch, Lena stood at her window, looking at the busy street below. The foundation's success had brought media attention, speaking invitations, even a book deal she'd declined. People wanted to turn her story into inspiration. But Lena resisted. She wasn't a hero. She was just someone who'd chosen to use hurt to help others. "Penny for your thoughts?" Nathan joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "Just thinking about how far we've come. 5 years ago, I was serving coffee. Now I'm running an organization that's changing lives. It still doesn't feel quite real." "It's real. You made it real." Nathan kissed her temple. "My father saw something in you that night, the kind of integrity that's rarer than diamonds. We did something extraordinary," Lena corrected. "All of us." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city below. Somewhere were people facing false accusations. And here was an organization dedicated to fighting for them. The foundation's motto, inscribed in the lobby, was simple: "The truth always returns." It was something Harold had said in his final testimony. No matter how deeply buried, truth always found its way back. Sometimes it took years, sometimes it required courage and sacrifice, but it always returned. And when it did, Lena's team would be there to make sure it was heard. That evening, as Lena prepared to leave, she paused at the photograph in her office, the opening day. She and Nathan stood on the brownstone steps, Mrs. Green between them, all smiling with hope and determination. She thought about Harold Reed, the stranger who'd become her benefactor and guide. She thought about his final gift, not the money, but the faith. Faith that goodness existed. Faith that one honest act could ripple outward and change the world. Lena touched the photograph gently. "We did it," she whispered, "just like you believed we would." She turned off the lights and stepped into the hallway, where Nathan waited to walk her home. They left hand in hand, 2 people who'd found each other in darkness and chosen to create light. The city sprawled around them, full of stories and struggles and small acts of kindness that might change everything. And in a modest brownstone, a foundation stood ready to fight for truth, one case at a time. Because Harold Reed had been right, integrity was the most valuable currency in the world. And when invested wisely, it paid dividends that lasted forever. The rain had stopped years ago, but its legacy remained, washed clean, renewed, and ready to begin again.